The first sound is breathing, then a voice, low, trembling, almost attached. "I stabbed her," the woman says. "The voices told me to." The dispatcher pauses, unsure if it's a prank, unsure she heard correctly. The woman repeats herself, slower this time, as if confirming it to someone only she can hear. "They told me to stab her." It is 2:47 p.m. on April 21st, 2025, in Palm Beach County, Florida. The address flashes on the dispatcher's screen, a quiet apartment complex in Lake Park. The woman on the line identifies herself as 27-year-old Rashawn Gatlin. Her voice is eerily steady. She says she has a 3-year-old daughter. Then she says she has stabbed her. The following report is based on official police records. Please note that all persons charged with a crime are presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty in a court of law. The dispatcher begins the usual questions. "Where are you? Is your daughter breathing?" But the answers come scattered, almost floating, as if Rashawn is speaking from somewhere far away. She tells him it was a butcher knife, 8 inches long. She says she doesn't know why. She says the voices told her to do it. Outside, the world is calm. The afternoon sun spills across manicured lawns. Neighbors hear nothing unusual until the sirens appear, slicing to the Florida heat. 2 Palm Beach County sheriff's deputies arrive within minutes. Their body cameras capture a scene that feels suspended in unreality. The front door is unlocked. The apartment is small, neat, quiet. A television hums softly in the background. On the living room couch sits Rashawn. Her hands are covered in blood. Beside her lies a little girl, conscious, breathing, her head resting in her mother's lap. The deputies call for medics, voices tight with disbelief. One of them asks, "Ma'am, what happened here?" Rashawn looks up. "I stabbed her," she says again. "They told me to." There's no anger in her tone, no panic. She sounds almost apologetic, as if describing a household accident. When the deputy presses for details, she gestures vaguely toward the bathroom. "The knife's in there," she says. Inside the small tile bathroom, officers find a large kitchen knife on the floor, streaked with blood. Nearby are droplets leading back to the living room. The deputies' radios crackle with updates. Child victim alive, multiple stab wounds to the back, mother detained. A medic kneels beside the girl, speaking gently. The child's small voice answers questions in broken phrases, too faint to make sense of. Outside, curious neighbors gather behind yellow tape. Some recognize Rashawn. Quiet woman, usually kept to herself, seen walking with her daughter to the nearby park. No one can imagine what they're hearing. One neighbor later tells reporters, "She was always smiling. She looked like any mom." As paramedics carry the child toward the ambulance, Rashawn watches, expression unreadable. She asks if her daughter is dead. When told she's alive, she nods once, as if acknowledging a fact she already knew. Then, almost whispering, she says, "I'm sorry." Deputies guide her toward a patrol car. She doesn't resist. She asks them to shoot her. When they refuse, she sighs, the way someone might when they realize there's still a long day ahead. "Please," she says, "I don't want to be here anymore." The ride to the sheriff's office is silent except for the hum of the tires. Her wrists are cupped behind her, her head tilted toward the window. She watches the palm trees blur past, eyes unfocused. One deputy later described her as calm, too calm. Back at the apartment, crime scene investigators begin their slow work. Photographs of the knife, the blood pattern, the small footprints of the child across the tile. A bag of medication is found on the kitchen counter. One of the bottles is half empty. Another, still sealed, has a prescription label dated only a few days earlier. At the hospital, doctors discover more than 20 puncture wounds, mostly shallow, clustered across the child's back and shoulders. Miraculously, none are fatal. She is conscious when admitted and, despite her injuries, able to speak. The medical staff later describe her as confused but responsive, repeatedly asking for her mother. As news spreads, the story begins to form its impossible shape. A mother who loved her daughter, who posted pictures of her online, who sang to her before bed. And now, the same mother in handcuffs, saying, "The voices told me to do it." The phrase becomes the center of everything. Detectives replay the 911 call. They listen to the monotone confession, the lack of hesitation. To them, it doesn't sound like guilt. It sounds like surrender. In the interrogation room, Rashawn sits alone for nearly an hour before detectives enter. When asked what happened, she says she doesn't know. When asked why she called 911, she says she wanted help. I didn't want to do it, she tells them. They told me to. Her voice cracks only once, when she asks whether her daughter will live. When told she will, Rashawn exhales softly, almost in relief. Outside the station, reporters gather. Police confirm the arrest, but release few details. The official statement is clinical. A 27-year-old female suspect has been charged with attempted first-degree murder with a deadly weapon and aggravated child abuse. Nothing more. No mention of voices. No mention of why. That night, in the quiet of her cell, Rashawn reportedly repeats fragments of her confession to herself. Guards hear her whispering, sometimes praying, sometimes humming softly. They say she seems frightened of the silence, as if something lives inside it. At St. Mary's Medical Center, the child sleeps under sedation. Her small body is covered in gauze and tape. The nurses take turns sitting beside her bed. One of them later says the girl murmured a single sentence before falling asleep again. Mommy had a scary face. By morning, the case is headline news across Florida. The words mother, voices, and child appear together in every report, a combination that stirs both horror and disbelief. Yet behind the headlines lies something quieter, the stillness of that living room, the space between each of Rashawn's words on the phone, the way she said they instead of I. What unfolded inside that apartment wasn't rage, and it wasn't hate. It was something colder, deeper, and harder to name, a mind turning against itself. And at its center sat a mother who loved her daughter so much she called for help the moment she realized what she'd done. That call will become the pivot point of the entire investigation. The proof of the crime, the evidence of intent, but also the last thread of something human. Every second of it recorded, every breath preserved. A mother's confession, echoing not from guilt, but from a void her illness had created. In the weeks to come, detectives, doctors, and prosecutors would each try to answer the same question. Who was speaking that day? The woman or the voices inside her head? The answer would determine whether this story was a crime or a tragedy of the mind. Before the blood, before the sirens, before the word voices meant anything at all, Rashawn Gatlin lived an ordinary life in Palm Beach County. The kind of life that leaves no trace in headlines or court records, only in family albums, grocery receipts, and the sound of a small child laughing in a sunlit apartment. On her Facebook page, the posts were simple, a selfie with her daughter at the playground, a birthday cake covered in pink frosting, captions like, "My girl means the world." Friends commented with heart emojis. She always replied with thank yous and smiley faces. If you scrolled through those pictures in order, there was no warning, only the slow erosion of light in her eyes, something most people wouldn't notice unless they were looking for it. Her boyfriend, Basilio, worked long hours and described her as quiet but sweet. Neighbors said she doted on her child. She was protective, sometimes overly so. The little girl, 3 years old, was small and talkative, always clinging to her mother's hand. They were inseparable. Rashawn rarely went anywhere without her. But over the winter, small things began to shift. She complained about not sleeping. She said she felt watched. Once, she told Basilio she heard footsteps in the hallway after midnight. He checked every room. Nothing. When he told her there was no one there, she didn't argue. She just nodded, as if she already knew he couldn't see what she saw. By December, the changes were impossible to ignore. She grew suspicious of noises, of shadows, of people. She started keeping the blinds closed, even on bright days. Sometimes she whispered to herself while washing dishes. She began checking the locks over and over. The world around her, once predictable, now seemed filled with invisible threats. That month, she was taken to a hospital for evaluation after telling a relative she didn't feel safe around her own child. She was diagnosed with schizophrenia and prescribed medication. For a while it worked. The doctors called it stabilization. She smiled again. She told the nurses she was ready to go home. When she returned to the apartment, she promised Basilio things would be different, and for a few weeks they were. Neighbors saw her laughing outside again. She took her daughter to the courtyard to play with sidewalk chalk. She baked cupcakes and posted a photo of them cooling on the counter. The caption read, "Better days ahead, but schizophrenia doesn't end when you leave the hospital. It waits. It whispers. It rearranges thoughts until love and fear start to sound the same." By March, Basilio noticed she was missing doses of her medication. She'd hide the pills under her tongue and spit them out later. When he asked why, she said they made her dizzy. He tried to reason with her, told her they were keeping her well. She just smiled faintly and said, "I feel fine now. I don't need them." The nights changed first. She would wake up suddenly, claiming she heard someone talking through the walls. Then came the cameras. She ordered them online and spent an entire weekend mounting them in every room. The living room, kitchen, hallway, even near the bathroom. She said it was to catch the person trying to hurt us. Basilio thought she meant burglars. He didn't realize she meant him. She accused him of plotting against her, of whispering to people on the phone about taking her child away. He denied it again and again, but each denial sounded like confirmation inside her head. Once, she told him she felt a presence behind her, something she couldn't explain. When he asked what she meant, she said, "It's in the house." Still, she kept functioning. She made breakfast. She got her daughter dressed. She seemed distracted, but not dangerous. Mental illness, especially in its early stages, can look like ordinary stress, even to the people closest to you. In early April, she posted another photo. Her daughter painting with watercolors, a messy rainbow on a page. The caption said, "My reason for everything." That picture would later appear in news reports, its sweetness almost unbearable in hindsight. A week later, Basilio told police he had taken her back to the hospital after she said she didn't want to live anymore. She told staff she felt urges to hurt herself and her child. They kept her for observation, adjusted her medication, and discharged her within days. When she came home, she seemed calm. He believed she was getting better. On Friday, April 18th, they ate dinner together. Rashawn laughed at something her daughter said. Saturday, she took her for ice cream. Sunday, they watched cartoons. There were no signs of what was coming. On Monday, Basilio left the apartment briefly to pick up his older son. He was gone for about 30 minutes. When he left, his daughter was coloring on the floor, and Rashawn was sitting quietly on the couch. He said everything felt normal. When he returned, police lights were flashing across the parking lot. The footage retrieved from Rashawn's cameras later filled in what no one witnessed. Around 2:45 p.m., she walked into the kitchen and took out an 8-inch knife. She stood there for a moment, staring at it, then set it down and walked back to her daughter. For the next minute, they sat together on the couch. She stroked the child's hair, whispered something inaudible. Her face was blank, distant, her eyes unfocused. Then she stood up again. The camera caught her second trip to the kitchen. This time she didn't hesitate. She took the knife and disappeared down the hall, guiding her daughter gently toward the bathroom. After that, only sound. The door closes. A child's cry echoes. 90 seconds later, silence. In the living room, the television keeps playing a cartoon. The room remains perfectly still. The air conditioning hum the only sound. Then footsteps. Rashawn emerges, face pale, holding her phone. She dials 911. That moment divides her life forever. The before and the after. The before was quiet, filled with love, photos, small routines. The after will be defined by the one call she could never take back. When detectives later asked her why she called, she said, "Because I wanted help." To her, that wasn't a confession. It was an emergency, one she believed no one had answered in time. From the outside, it looked like madness descending in a single afternoon. But to those who study minds at fracture, it rarely happens in an instant. It's a slow surrender, Reality eroding piece by piece until the person who looks like a mother, sounds like a mother, and loves like a mother begins to see her own child through a veil of delusion. To Rashawn, the world had become two overlapping realities, one filled with love, the other filled with whispers. And on that April afternoon, the voices were louder. By the time help arrived, the ordinary life everyone thought she had was already gone, replaced by something that neither she nor anyone else would ever fully understand. It did not arrive like a storm. It arrived like a draft on the door, too thin to see, too easy to ignore. In the beginning, there was only a feeling that the apartment had grown larger at night, that the hallways stretched farther than it used to, that the air carried a hush that wasn't silence so much as waiting. Rashawn told herself it was stress. New schedules, not enough sleep, a season that wouldn't end. By winter, the waiting had a shape. She started waking at 3 a.m., certain she'd heard something move in the kitchen. She would lie still and listen, eyes fixed on a line of light beneath the door, convinced she could hear the low murmur of speech just beyond it. When she finally rose and checked, nothing was there, only the refrigerator humming and the soft tick of the thermostat. She wrote notes to herself on the back of receipts. Take meds, breathe, it isn't real. In the daylight, those words felt unnecessary, even embarrassing. At noon, she could laugh and make lunch and fold laundry with the television, playing children's songs in the background. At noon, the world made sense. But at 3 in the morning, the notes were instructions for survival. The first time she admitted something was wrong, her voice was small. She said she felt watched, even with the blinds shut. She said the apartment's corners had started to mean something, as if the geometry itself had turned against her. She said she could hear a presence behind her. When asked to explain, she couldn't. She only shrugged, as if the right words existed somewhere she could not reach. December brought the hospital, an evaluation, a diagnosis that came with long names and careful tones. The staff adjusted her medication and asked if she felt safe. Yes, she said, she did. She wanted to go home. She missed her daughter. She promised to follow the plan exactly. She signed the papers with a steady hand. She smiled at the nurse who wheeled her past the double doors. For a time, the world narrowed to the ordinary. Breakfast at the small table by the window. A walk to the courtyard. Crayons scattered across the floor, all the bright colors jumbled together. She posted a photo of cupcakes cooling on the counter and typed a caption that sounded like prayer dressed up as optimism. Better days ahead. Schizophrenia is not a straight line. It is a braid of good hours and bad ones, insight and doubt, relief and the quiet return of the same thought wearing a different mask. Rashawn began to feel heavy on the medication. Her hands shook when she poured juice. The daylight felt muffled. Sometimes she forgot a dose because the afternoon ran together. Sometimes she skipped one on purpose to see if the edges would sharpen. They did. The sharpening felt like waking up. It also brought the draft back under the door. She ordered cameras. One for the living room, one for the hallway, one near the kitchen, one a little too close to the bathroom to make sense to anyone but her. She said it was for safety. She said she was tired of doubt. She said she needed proof of whatever was circling them when the lights went out. She screwed the small black eyes into the walls herself, measuring with a strip of masking tape, so the angles overlapped. By nightfall, the apartment watched itself. The cameras recorded hours of nothing. Cartoons, laundry, a child played with a plastic horse, the light moving across the floor. They also recorded what her memory could not hold still. She would pause mid-sentence and stare just aside of the lens, as if someone were standing where only the corner met the ceiling. The footage caught a small flinch at sounds no one else could hear. In one clip, she touched the back of her neck, and then checked her hand for something that wasn't there. The nights tightened. She stopped opening the blinds. She unplugged the television, and then plugged it back in because silence made the other thing louder. She left music on the lowest possible volume, a thin veil of sound to paint over the whispering she could not place. She tested the door lock twice, then 4 times, then again because the first 4 felt like they belonged to a different hour. There were still good days. She laughed at a joke her daughter invented. She sang along to a song from years ago and got the words wrong on purpose, just to make the child giggle. She fell asleep on the couch with a blanket over both of them and woke to the sun in her eyes, surprised at how normal it felt. Good days are dangerous when they become evidence that help is not needed. In early spring, she spoke more openly about the presence. It didn't have a face. It didn't have a name. It lived in the space behind her shoulder, close enough to feel, too close to see. Sometimes it leaned near and breathed a suggestion. The suggestions were not violent at first. They were questions about trust. Why is he on the phone so long? Why did he laugh after you left the room? Why did the neighbor look at your daughter for a second too long at the mailboxes? The questions changed the room, not the people. Suspicion grew like hairline cracks across glass. She tried to argue with it. She said out loud that it wasn't real. The apartment turned her words into sound and then swallowed them as if to prove the opposite. She held her daughter a little tighter. She moved the camera a few inches to the left and then back again because an inch felt like control. Another hospital visit followed after she said she didn't want to live, after she admitted the thought of harm had crossed her mind like a shadow. She was observed. The plan was adjusted. The discharge papers read stable. Those words have a medical meaning. They are not a promise. She came home quieter. She took her pills on time, then later than she should have, then not at all for a day that became two. The weight returned to her limbs when she took them. The light returned to the corners when she didn't. She chose light. It is hard to blame someone for wanting to feel awake. The voices did not begin as voices. They began as the most reasonable form of fear a person can have. A warning. Don't go in there. Don't trust that. Don't turn your back. Warnings are human. They keep us alive. The difference is that these warnings did not stop when the danger passed, because the danger was not outside the door. They grew bolder. They borrowed her cadence. They spoke from the seam where thought becomes language. At first she mistook them for intuition. Later she understood that intuition does not repeat itself with such mechanical patience. Tell him to leave the room. Check the drawer. Move the knife. Move it back. Hold it. Put it down. Pick it up. On a good afternoon, she would set the blade on the counter and step away, proud of the small distance she had made between impulse and action. On a bad afternoon, the distance felt preposterous, like pretending a dam could be stronger than the river pressing against it. She tried substitutes. Prayer, cold water on her wrists, counting backward from 100. All of it worked briefly. The way turn on a light makes the mirror look like a mirror again until you turn it off and the room remembers what it prefers. Her daughter sensed the changes without knowing their names. Children notice patterns. The child began to touch her mother's face, as if confirming it was still the one she knew. She hid under the blanket, and then peeked out at the same place on the wall that held her mother's gaze so often. Once she asked why the house was whispering. Rashawn said the air conditioner was old. It was not a lie, and it was not the truth. Those who loved her tried to measure the danger from the outside. They asked simple questions. Are you sleeping? Are you eating? Do you feel safe? She answered honestly from inside a different map. Sometimes. Honesty did not bridge the distance between maps. The stepson later said he felt watched when he stood at the sink. He said he had the strange certainty that if he turned quickly enough, he would catch someone standing behind him. He never did. He dismissed it as imagination, because that is what a healthy mind does with a flicker of fear in a familiar room. He could step out of the feeling. She could not. The cameras kept recording. The apartment kept keeping score. A week before the stabbing, the hallway lens shows her pause with her hand on the bathroom door, breathing through a thought that will not disperse. She turns away and goes back to the couch. The child climbs into her lap. The danger recedes. The tape keeps rolling. She picks up her phone and scrolls through pictures of the same child sleeping, eating, smiling. She smiles too. It is almost enough. Medication compliance becomes another battlefield. The bottle sits on the counter, like a dare. She sets a reminder. She cancels it. She promises herself she will take the next dose early to make up for the one she missed. She forgets the promise and remembers the reason she made it, and then forgets that too. She tells herself she will ask for help again if the presence returns. It returns that night. She decides to wait until morning. In the morning it is quiet. She convinces herself that quiet is the same thing as safety. That afternoon, it is not quiet. By the time April draws its line to the calendar, the war has reached a stage where the voice has learned efficiency. It does not argue anymore. It does not present evidence. It issues tasks. The tasks are simple because simple tasks are harder to disobey. Stand up, walk to the kitchen, open the drawer, choose a long knife. Hold it until the handle feels like part of your hand. Put it down, pick it up again. Listen, she does not look like a person at war. That is one of the cruelties. On the camera, she is a mother sitting beside her daughter, brushing crumbs from a tiny shirt, smoothing hair behind a small ear. She stands. She sits. She stands again. She vanishes down the short hallway with the child's hand in hers because the command is no longer a suggestion and because her love cannot outshout what speaks in her voice. What happened in the bathroom is described in reports by numbers. Wounds counted, distance measured, time approximated. Numbers are a way to keep from drowning in the story they summarize. They do not explain how a mind rearranges itself until harm feels like obedience and obedience feels like safety, and the only remaining act of love is to call for help, as if calling could rewind what has already been done. When she emerges and dials, the voice does not vanish. It moves to the edge of hearing, content to wait, confident it has been proven real. Later, in the interview room, she tries to describe it without granting it power. She says they told me. She does not say who they are because there is no who, only a set of instructions where her accent. From the outside, the dissent will be summarized as missed doses and prior warnings, and a system that could not hold a human being long enough for the medicine to take root. From inside, it was a series of doors, each one opening onto a smaller room, each room containing the same chair, the same shadow, the same sentence. Do as you're told. There is no single moment to circle in red ink and label the beginning. The beginning was a draft under the door. The end of the beginning was a day the voice spoke an imperative, and she obeyed. After that, everything that follows is evidence. At 2:42 p.m., the motion sensor in the kitchen came alive. A faint electronic click signaled the start of a recording that would later become the case's central exhibit. The footage, silent and grainy, began like any other moment in an ordinary afternoon. Sunlight spilling through half-closed blinds, a small child humming in another room, the low rhythm of domestic quiet. Then a figure entered the frame, Rashawn barefoot, still in the soft gray clothes she had worn that morning. She opened a drawer, reached inside, and drew out the long knife. The blade caught the light like a mirror and threw it back across her face. She stood still, staring not at the knife but at something far away, beyond the camera's reach. For a moment, her shoulders fell. She set the knife down, turned, and walked out of the kitchen. The child's voice drifted in from the living room, calling for her. Rashawn answered softly, something tender, almost musical. For the next minute, the footage showed nothing unusual. She sat beside her daughter on the couch. The girl traced patterns on her mother's arm with a crayon. Rashawn didn't move. Her eyes were open, but they seemed to look through the wall, fixed on something no one else could see. The stillness was absolute, the kind that suggests a decision is being made somewhere deep beneath thought. Then at 2:44, she stood again. She walked back into the kitchen. This time, she did not hesitate. She picked up the knife, turned down the hall, and disappeared into the narrow space leading to the bathroom. The camera caught the small child following behind, still holding the crayon. The bathroom door closed. What happened next can only be reconstructed from sound. The recording picked up muffled voices, then the thud of movement, a brief scream, a child's cry that broke into gasps, and finally silence. 90 seconds in total. When the door opened again, Rashawn stepped out first. She moved mechanically, like someone following instructions she no longer believed in. She placed the knife on the hallway floor and went to the couch. Her phone was on the cushion where she had left it. She dialed 911. The call lasted 7 minutes. She told the operator what she had done. She answered every question in a voice, so calm the dispatcher asked twice if the line was still open. "I stabbed her," she said. "They told me to." When asked who they were, she didn't respond. The operator told her to stay with her child, to apply pressure, to keep speaking so they would know she was alive. The first deputies arrived 4 minutes later. Their body cameras recorded the rest. The unlocked door, the faint smell of iron, the child lying against her mother's lap. The footage would later be described in reports as emotionally distressing but essential. It showed Rashawn's hands trembling, her fingers slick with blood as she tried to follow the dispatcher's instructions. "I'm sorry," she kept saying. "I didn't want to do it." One deputy knelt beside the child, asked her name, checked her breathing. She was still conscious. When he lifted her gently, she cried out once, then clung to his vest. The other deputy led Rashawn outside. Neighbors watched from doorways, confused, afraid. She told the officers to shoot her. They refused. She said she didn't want to live anymore. When they placed her in the back of the patrol car, she didn't resist. She sat motionless, her eyes fixed on the apartment windows, as if something inside were still watching her. Inside, the medics moved quickly. They counted the wounds, shallow but numerous, mostly to the back and shoulders. None had reached a vital organ. The knife had struck more times and forcefully. To the investigators who would later review the scene, this detail would matter. It suggested hesitation, a conflict between the act and the person committing it. While paramedics stabilized the child, detectives began cataloging the room. The bathroom floor bore a faint smear of blood that had already begun to dry. Beside the tub, a child's towel printed with cartoon animals. On the counter, toothpaste uncapped, a hairbrush, a plastic cup with pink flowers. Ordinary objects, untouched, made the violence harder to comprehend. In the kitchen, crime scene technicians photographed a knife. 8 inches long, black handle, common household brand. The timestamp on the footage confirmed what the 911 call later matched. The attack had lasted barely more than a minute that would divide every life connected to that apartment into a before and after. At St. Mary's Medical Center, doctors worked on the little girl for nearly 2 hours. She was stable by evening. She spoke once during treatment, saying she wanted her mother. When told her mother couldn't come, she asked why. The nurse said only that her mother was sick. It was the simplest truth available. Back at the sheriff's office, detectives tried to build a timeline. Basilio arrived shortly after, still in disbelief. He had been gone less than half an hour. He said there had been no argument, no sign of anger. "She was fine," he kept repeating. "She was fine." He explained her recent hospitalizations, her medication, the nights when she said the walls whispered. "She told me she felt something behind her," he said. "I thought she meant a ghost. I didn't think she meant herself." By dusk, the evidence bags were sealed. The cameras were taken as exhibits, their digital eyes filled with images no one could unsee. Reporters had gathered outside the complex, their lights washing the walls in a harsh white glare. Neighbors whispered about curses, demons, stress, drugs, anything easier to accept than the truth that the mind itself could become the scene of a crime. Inside the interrogation room, Rashawn sat alone under fluorescent light. Her hands shook, leaving faint rust marks on the table from the dry blood on her wrists. When the detective entered, she looked up as though waking from a dream. He asked if she knew where she was. She nodded. He asked why she had called 911. She said she didn't know what else to do. Her voice was almost kind when she spoke about the child. "She's a good girl," she said. "She didn't do anything wrong." Then, after a long pause, "They told me I had to." The detective asked who they were. She blinked, confused, as if he'd asked the wrong question. "You don't hear them?" she said. "They said it would stop if I did what they said." When the questioning ended, she was left in silence. The camera continued recording for another 20 minutes. She rubbed her arms, murmured to herself, then sat perfectly still. Later that night, an investigator wrote in his report, "The suspect appeared to oscillate between lucidity and dissociation. She showed remorse, but lacked comprehension of the event's reality. When asked what she believed would happen afterward, she said, 'Maybe the voices will let me sleep now.'" The next morning, the sun rose over the same quiet complex. Children waited for school buses on the corner. The courtyard sprinklers clicked to life. Nothing in the scene suggested what had occurred behind that single door 24 hours earlier. Yet inside, the apartment was sealed with police tape, still carrying the faint echo of the call that began it all. For the investigators, this was now a matter of evidence. For the doctors, a matter of treatment. For the court, a matter of law. But for the small child lying in a hospital bed, it was simpler and more incomprehensible than all of it. She would tell a detective later that her mother had fangs, that her face had changed. The mind of a child trying to make sense of what no mind should witness. In that single afternoon, the illness that had whispered for months finally spoke loud enough to be obeyed. The act lasted less than 2 minutes, but its echo would live in recordings, in transcripts, in the small scar tissue of a survivor who would never fully forget the moment the person who loved her most became a stranger. The system would later call it attempted first-degree murder. The file would list it by date and statute. But the cameras, the call, and the silence afterward told another story entirely. A moment when a human mind fractured, and through that fracture, something unthinkable slipped into the world and stayed. In the sterile brightness of the interview room, the hum of the air vent was the only sound. Rashawn sat at the metal table, wrists cuffed loosely, staring at her reflection in the mirror glass across from her. Her face was pale, streaked with dried tears, the kind that never fully fell. She looked more exhausted than defiant, more lost than dangerous. The detectives had been briefed. They already knew the facts, the footage, the knife, the child's survival, but not the why. The why was what kept them awake. When the door opened, Detective Morales entered quietly, placing a bottle of water on the table. He spoke softly, like a doctor explaining a diagnosis. "We just want to understand what happened today, okay?" She nodded, eyes down. "You called 911 yourself," he continued. "You said you stabbed your daughter. Can you tell me why?" Rashawn hesitated, then whispered, "Because they told me to." Morales leaned forward. "Who told you?" "The voices." He asked what the voices sounded like. She said sometimes they were men, sometimes women, sometimes her own. They came from behind her, like someone speaking near her ear. "They don't yell," she said. "They just say it, like a reminder." "How long have you heard them?" "A while." She didn't look up. She spoke in fragments, half thoughts. The detective tried to keep her talking. "What do they say to you, Rashawn?" "They say things about people, about my little girl, about what could happen to her if I don't listen. They said I wasn't protecting her." There was no tremor in her voice, no hint of theatrics. It was the tone of someone describing the weather, neutral, inevitable. Morales asked if she wanted to hurt her daughter. She shook her head. "No, never. But they said she had something in her. Something bad. They said if I didn't stop it, it would grow." He asked what she meant by it. She couldn't answer. "I don't know," she said. "It just was." The detective let the silence stretch. Across the glass, another officer watched from the observation room, arms folded. Every word was being recorded, every gesture time-stamped. The confession was clear, but motive, that invisible territory between reason and madness, was still shifting under her feet. After a few minutes, Morales asked, "What happened right before it started? Before you went to the kitchen?" Rashawn's eyes flickered. "She was drawing," she said softly. She looked happy. "I thought it was over. But then I heard them again. They said it was time. I didn't want to, but they said I had to. Why call 911 after? They told me to stop, but then they laughed. I didn't know if she was dead. I didn't want her to die. I wanted it to end." Morales took a slow breath. "Rashawn, do you still hear them right now?" She nodded slightly. "What are they saying?" "They're mad that I'm talking to you." Her gaze drifted toward the corner of the ceiling, the way someone might glance at a spider on the wall. For a moment, her lips moved without sound. The detective followed her eyes, saw nothing but light and plaster. He shifted the conversation to medication. She admitted she hadn't taken her pills that morning. "They make me slow," she said. "They make it harder to listen for danger." He asked when she stopped trusting her medicine. When the voices said the pills are what made them stronger, they said the medicine keeps them inside. She pressed her palms flat against the table, breathing shallowly. "It's quiet now," she whispered, "but it won't stay that way." The detective wrote down each phrase carefully, but part of him already understood what the report would later conclude: a woman spiraling into psychosis, untreated long enough for delusion to become belief. The law required proof of intent. The mind offered only fragments. Outside the interview room, Basilio waited. He looked hollow, pacing in slow circles near the vending machine. When detectives finally brought him in, his first question was about his daughter. "Is she alive?" When they told him yes, he broke down. Then he asked if Rashawn was still hearing things. The officer nodded. "She says she hears voices," he replied. Basilio sat heavily in the chair. "She never told me that part," he said. "She talked about being scared, about someone wanting to hurt us, but she never said voices." He rubbed his face, speaking more to himself than to anyone else. "I thought it was stress. I told her I'd take her back to the hospital if she felt worse, but she seemed fine. She played with our girl this morning." I kissed them both goodbye. Later that evening, Basilio's teenage son gave his own statement. His words added another piece to the slow collapse. "Sometimes I felt like she was looking right through me," he said, "like she didn't know who I was. Once, I was in the kitchen, and I swear I felt something behind me, like someone was standing there, breathing. I thought it was her, but when I turned, nobody was there. It felt like the air was alive." He paused, searching for words. "I knew something was coming. I just didn't think it'd be that." Inside the station, Rashawn's interrogation continued past sunset. She asked for her daughter several times. When told the child was in the hospital, she said, "That's good. Maybe now she'll be safe." She was reminded she had the right to remain silent. She nodded but kept talking. They said it was the only way. I didn't believe them, but they wouldn't stop until I did it. They said she wasn't my daughter anymore. They said she was something else. "Do you believe that now?" Her voice cracked. "No, I know she's mine. I know it wasn't real, but it felt real." At 8:30 p.m., the interrogation ended. The detectives left the room, and she sat alone, staring at her hands. She turned them over, studying the small crescent dents left by the handcuffs. Then she whispered, "Please, make them stop." In the hallway, one of the deputies spoke quietly to another. "She doesn't even seem to understand what she's done," he said. The other shook his head. "She understands enough to be broken by it." By the next morning, the sheriff's office released a short statement confirming her arrest for attempted first-degree murder and aggravated child abuse. Reporters called it one of the most disturbing cases in Palm Beach County in years. But within the walls of the station, the mood was somber rather than sensational. Even the veterans who had seen every kind of cruelty recognized that this was different. Not a story of anger or revenge, but of a human mind devoured by itself. The jail records listed her condition as emotionally unstable, under suicide watch. Guards were told to monitor her constantly. Some nights, she spoke quietly to the ceiling, responding to things no one else could hear. Other nights, she was silent, unmoving, as if she feared the act of speaking might summon something back. The investigators who'd sat across from her replayed the tapes in the weeks that followed, listening to her voice over and over. It was not the voice of a monster. It was the voice of someone haunted. The kind of haunting that medicine sometimes delays but rarely cures. What lingered most wasn't the confession, or even the violence. It was a quiet between her sentences, the way she paused before each answer, as though checking with the unseen before she spoke. The silence of a mind negotiating with itself. And in that silence, one fact became inescapable. She hadn't been fighting her child. She had been fighting her own thoughts, and lost. The morning after the attack, the sky over Palm Beach County looked indifferent, wide and bright, the kind of Florida morning that makes tragedy feel like a contradiction. At St. Mary's Medical Center, a small girl stirred beneath hospital sheets printed with cartoon fish. Her bandaged back rose and fell with shallow breaths. Nurses moved quietly around her, their voices hushed. When she finally opened her eyes, she asked one question, "Where's Mommy?" Doctors said she was lucky, though that word sat uneasily in their mouths. More than 20 wounds, none fatal. The knife had missed every artery, every organ. The cuts were shallow, erratic. They looked like the work of hesitation, like a mother at war with herself. The deputies who had carried the child out of that apartment stopped by the hospital that day. They stood by the door, uncertain if their presence would bring comfort or confusion. One nurse said the girl had been asking about the kitty cat. They didn't understand until a detective arrived later with a recording of her first statement. In it, the child's voice was faint, uncertain. Mommy had fangs. She told the detective her mother took her into the bathroom, that Mommy's face had changed, that she wasn't Mommy anymore. She was a kitty cat with sharp teeth. In her young mind, it was the only way to explain what she had seen. The person she loved most transformed. The detective didn't press for more. Trauma in a child that age becomes language made of symbols. Fangs was easier than knife. Kitty cat was easier than sickness. When she tired of questions, the detective switched to a game of hide and seek in the hospital room. She laughed when he pretended to lose. For a moment, her world became what it should have been all along. Play, not fear. Outside, the story spread fast. Television vans parked near the sheriff's office. Headlines repeated the same unbearable phrase. Mother says voices told her to stab child. Neighbors gave interviews in disbelief. She loved that little girl. One said, she was just quiet. You'd never think. Others mentioned the cameras she'd installed, the strange way she watched them at night. The videos were now in police evidence, every second cataloged. They would be studied frame by frame, though they already contained all the truth the world would ever need. That Rashawn Gatlin had not been evil, only lost. In the days that followed, reporters pieced together her recent hospital visits, her prescribed medication, her release just a week before the stabbing. The questions turned from why did she do it to how was she allowed to? The familiar debate began between mental illness and accountability, between failure of the system and failure of the individual. But none of that mattered to the little girl lying in a hospital bed, tracing the edge of her bandage with tiny fingers. Basilio visited her every day. He sat by the bed and read stories until she fell asleep. The nurses said she often woke calling for her mother, then went silent, as if remembering. When they told him she would heal, he nodded. Physically, maybe, he said, but I don't know about the rest. At the jail across town, Rashawn remained under suicide watch. She rarely spoke. Guards said she spent hours sitting on her bunk, staring at the wall. Once, when a nurse checked her vitals, she asked if her daughter was alive. When told yes, she wept for the first time since her arrest. Good, she said. She can still be safe. Her attorneys requested a psychiatric evaluation. The report described auditory hallucinations, paranoid delusions, and disorganized thought, consistent with untreated schizophrenia. The conclusion was clinical but devastating. She was competent enough to stand trial, but deeply impaired. In legal terms, that meant she would answer for what her illness had done. Months passed. The little girl recovered faster than anyone expected. Her scars faded to thin white lines. She started preschool again. Her father didn't let her talk about that day, but sometimes, when she played alone, he heard her whisper to her toys. Mommy was sick, she would tell them. Mommy's better now. Then she'd move on to something else. As children do, when detectives returned for a follow-up interview, she greeted them with the bright, careless energy of a survivor too young to grasp the word. They asked if she remembered what happened. She said yes, then quickly changed the subject. Want to play? She said. The detective smiled and agreed. For a few minutes, the investigation became a game again. In the courtroom months later, Rashawn appeared gaunt and quiet. Her hair was shorter, her wrists pale beneath the handcuffs. She didn't look at the gallery. She didn't cry. When the charges were read, attempted first-degree murder with a deadly weapon and aggravated child abuse, she simply whispered, "Not guilty." The plea wasn't denial. It was procedure. The judge ordered continued evaluation. Outside, reporters described her as emotionless. They didn't see the tiny tremor in her hands when the photos of her daughter were shown, the one moment when her stillness broke. Forensic psychologists would later debate whether her attack was a result of command hallucinations or delusional misidentification, a condition where the mind convinces itself loved ones have been replaced by imposters. Either way, it was a psychosis that left reason powerless, a war inside the mind, fought in silence, witnessed only when the body acted. In interviews, Basilio never used the word hate. She wasn't herself, he said. I know that now. I saw her when she was sick. I saw her when she was well. They were two different people. The child stayed with him, growing steadier each day. He told her stories about her mother's kindness, not her illness. He showed her pictures from birthdays and park visits, so that someday, if she remembered, the memories might have something gentle to hold on to. As for Rashawn, she remains in custody at the Palm Beach County Jail, awaiting trial. Her case moves slowly through the system, tangled between criminal law and mental health courts. Her attorneys are expected to argue insanity. Whether she will spend her life in a prison cell or a psychiatric ward is still undecided. In the end, no one doubts that she loved her daughter. The tragedy is that love wasn't enough to silence the voices that replace her own. When the detectives closed the case file months later, they listed the incident under its technical classification: attempted homicide, domestic. But on the final page of the report, one officer added a line not required by protocol. Suspect appeared remorseful, likely driven by psychotic break. Child expected to recover. The words read like a eulogy for two lives, one that survived and one that did not, even though both hearts still beat. In the footage preserved from that day, there's a single frame the public has never seen. It lasts less than a second. Rashawn sits on the couch, her daughter in her lap, the knife still on the kitchen counter. The light from the blinds cuts across their faces in alternating bands of shadow and sun. The child is smiling. The mother's expression is unreadable, a flicker of love, fear, and surrender all at once. That is the moment before everything broke. The last instant when her mind still belonged to her. The last time the world made sense. Now, what remains are records, the call, the footage, the testimony, fragments of a woman's war with herself. A war no one else could see until it was too late. And for the small girl who lived through it, life goes on. School mornings, coloring books, laughter. She will grow up surrounded by people who love her, but one truth will always hover quietly at the edge of memory, that sometimes the monsters we fear are not real at all, but the echoes of the mind trying to survive its own darkness.